Right, so basically all I'm going to do is do a quick run through from my parameter of my presentation, and when I finish I'll talk to you about the feedback I received for that presentation, the positives and the negatives. I will let you know about the questions that I received, and I'll also talk a little bit about the questions that other students received as well, and just to give you a good idea of perhaps what needs to be done when you come to your presentation. Okay, so I'll start with my presentation. Right, the purpose of my dissertation was to critically evaluate the role of monetary policy in the 2008 financial crisis. To achieve that objective, I categorized into the following chapters. Chapter 1 reviewed the financial crisis. We started off looking at where it started following the dot-com crash, which forced monetary authorities to reduce interest rates, which encouraged investment. As a result, a housing bubble ensued. Due to a deregulated mortgage market, there was a rise in subprime lending to occupy the rise in demand. The main reason that lenders relaxed their lending was because they didn't hold on to the loans. What they actually did was they sold them to financial institutions, who then pulled the mortgages together, formed them into shares, and sold them to investors. The investors would receive money from the payments that borrowers were made, that the borrowers made. Now, rating agencies thought that not enough mortgages would default to cause problems to the senior shareholders. Therefore, they declared the shares as AAA. However, in 2006, house prices reached levels that were unattainable for most families. As a result, the demand fell, and as such, price fell also. Now, for people who bought houses at their peak, this means that they were going to end up with negative equity, which is when the mortgage of the house is worth more than the house itself. Homeowners with negative equity are prime candidates for default. As default levels rose, what happened was the share values of the CDOs dropped dramatically. So, as these shareholders are experiencing heavy losses, we then want to look at how did this transpire into financial crisis. The financial crisis intensified when Lehman Brothers collapsed. Now, in 1984, Lehman Brothers invented the auction rate security. And what that was basically was individuals would lend to borrowers on a long-term basis, maybe up to 30 years. And if they wanted to get out of these investments, what they would have to do is they would have to go to auction, and potential investors would then have the right to bid for those investments to replace the existing investors. The interest rate was determined by the amount of bidders in the room. However, following the housing crash, investors lost their willingness or their ability to invest. So as a result, no one was turning up to these auctions. So what happened was the existing investors were trapped with these long-term investments, which they didn't want. So having seen the perils in the system, no one put money into it. So the auction rate security, which contained 400 billion at its peak, collapsed. So it needed a bailout, effectively. Lehman Brothers owed $400 billion, but the Federal Reserve said, due to moral hazard problems, that no, we can't do this, we're not going to lend you any money. As a result, there was a massive bank run in the shadow banking system. Banks lost their confidence in investment, and as a result, there was a massive bank run. Institutions across the globe are facing heavy losses because it's highly interconnected. the subprime crash caused Iceland, all of Iceland's banks to crash single-handedly. So as banks started losing, as banks were facing heavy losses, it meant that they lost their ability to lend. And for businesses that rely on banks to provide them with financial support, it meant they had no choice but to reduce their economic activity. As a result, there was a severe recession. The purpose of chapter 2 then was to look at was the monetary authorities to blame for the housing crash. We start by looking at what happened following the dot-com crash and the 2001 recession. The Federal Reserve decided that they would expand the money supply and decrease interest rates. Taylor argues that that this policy was too easy. They were decreasing interest rates more than they should have, and he showed this by using the Taylor model, which states that for a 1% fall in output gap, then the Federal Reserve should decrease interest rates by 0.5%. Now, plotting the actual interest rates with the Taylor rule, it can be seen that the actual interest rates were well below what Taylor suggests policy should be. He then said that this extra easy policy was responsible for the housing crash, and he did this by building two models. The first model showed actual relationships between housing starts and interest rates. The second model was an econometric model in which he estimated what housing starts would have been if they followed the Taylor rule. Now, using these two models, he shows that if policy followed the Taylor rule, the housing crash would have been a lot less severe. The Fed responded by saying that they had no control over interest rates at that time, and that actually there was a severe savings gap in which investment was a lot higher than savings was a lot higher than investment, so they needed to decrease interest rates to reduce that gap. However, looking at the data from the World Economic Outlook, there's no gap between investment and saving. It's just that there's a savings shortage. But this shouldn't necessarily lead to a severe reduction in interest rates. So looking at part 2, we can say that the monetary authorities should be blamed, quite particularly for the housing bubble. The next chapter is to look at, the policy probably did contribute to the housing crash, but when the housing crash did happen, why couldn't they implement policies to prevent crisis? And we'll look at the two main instruments used during the crisis, and that's the term auction facility and further lowering the Fed funds rate. The term auction facility, what basically happened was the Federal Reserve would hold an auction and financial institutions would bid for a certain amount of capital. It would be given at an interest rate equal to the lowest accepted bid. The purpose was to reduce the spread in the money markets and get credit flowing again. However, if you look at the graph there, you have the term auction facility demonstrated by the green and the red line, and the money markets given by the blue line. And you can see there is an initial reduction in the money market spread. However, it soon rises again, so there's no real sign of policy helping there. The other instrument was further reducing the Fed funds rate. Obviously, as you decrease interest rates, purpose that encourage investors to borrow in the short term and then to invest in higher yielding long-term investments. This is to get credit flowing again. However, what chart 7 shows is a spread between US government agencies securities and treasury securities. Now, government agency securities are only slightly more risky than treasury securities, but there is an uphill trend, and the reason is because investors didn't want to invest in anything except from very safe investments such as treasury securities. So this shows that they were reluctant to invest. This policy isn't working. The main reason that policy failed is because they were targeting the wrong problems. Whilst the Federal Reserve were concentrating on combating the liquidity problems, the markets actually suggested that the main problems were related to risk and not liquidity. So given this information then, and the fact that monetary policy was not working, what other policies were available to help deal with the financial crisis? Many economists believe that macroprudential policy is the answer. Basically, macroprudential policy looks at reducing the system-wide the systemic risks and the risk of system-wide distress, which have severe economic costs across the world. So to do this, they propose that first you should monitor the health of individual banks. You can employ stress tests or evaluate risks, which I've given there. Second, you need to coordinate the interlinked network of international banks. This has primarily been done in the G20 meetings, where where top authorities from across the world meet and they try and agree to some sort of way of how to deal with financial issues. So, like the Tobin tax, for example, they would meet, discuss whether that should be implemented or not. And it's hard to get it working effectively because there are certain issues, like in London, we do not want the Tobin tax because our main economy is from the financial sector. If you tax our financial sector, then obviously that would have implications for our economy, whereas countries like Germany, etc., they see this as a solution to the problems of Greece and Italy. And three, when there are weaknesses in the system, it says that authorities need to act decisively. So that if the stress test suggests that banks are running out of capital and that they need helping out, then it says that they must act decisively to bail them up. Right, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Feedback that I got from my presentation, the positives, I'm trying to think of my tutor, what was last year? John James. He said that that my knowledge was very good. He said that I used good use of the models, and he liked the fact that I used the models to help explain things. And he said that the structure was good also. On the negative side though, he said that it was too long. I couldn't quite fit it into the allocated time. And also I needed to interact more with the audience. So when you deliver your presentation, it is important to try and look at your audience and try and engage with them.